7 Lincoln on scene, rollover, heavy damage, need second unit and fire now.
Copy 7 Lincoln, additional units en route, ETA 2 minutes.
Sir, stay with me. Hey, look at me, I didn't see him, I
Who's
swear
in the
I didn't
car?
see him.
Talk to me.
It's Tyler, oh God, that's Tyler.
Alright, stay calm.
The night was quiet at the corner of North and First. The clock struck 10 p.m., and the city of Grand Junction seemed to be falling asleep. At the intersection, a small car sat still, waiting for the light to turn green. Inside was Andrew Martin Cross, a man known to many as the Desert Drifter. He was just 4 minutes away from his home, probably thinking about seeing his family. He did not know that his life was about to change forever in a single heartbeat. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by a terrifying sound. A white utility van was speeding down the road, moving much faster than the cars around it. Witnesses later said the driver seemed to be out of control, running red lights and driving wildly. As the van reached the intersection, there was no sound of brakes or tires screeching. Instead, there was a deafening crash as the van slammed into the back of Andrew's car at 82 miles per hour. The force of the hit was so strong that it flipped Andrew's car over. Glass flew everywhere, and metal twisted like it was paper. People nearby stopped what they were doing and rushed to help. One witness was so scared that he could barely speak into his phone to call 911. He told the dispatcher that he didn't even want to look because the wreck was so bad. He called it a mangle. The red light continued to shine, but the car it was meant to guide was now a heap of broken parts. While the world around them began to fill with the sound of sirens and flashing lights, everything inside the car went silent. Andrew was trapped inside, hurt very badly, while the driver of the van sat nearby in the dark. This moment was the start of a long search for the truth about what really happened that night. The man sitting on the curb next to the crash was named Anton Malvoni. He looked like a regular guy, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. He did not look like a monster, but he had just caused a terrible tragedy. When the police spoke to him, he seemed very confused. He told the officers that he was just a human and that he had made a mistake. Anton told the police a story about why the crash happened. He claimed that the floor mat in his van got stuck under the gas pedal. He said he tried to stop, but the van just kept going faster and faster. It sounded like a sad accident, but the police noticed things that did not fit his story. There was a strange smell coming from his breath, and his eyes looked heavy and tired. While Andrew was being rushed to the hospital to fight for his life, Anton stayed at the scene. He didn't seem angry or mean. Instead, he acted like someone who was caught in a bad dream. He even told the officers that he was a fan of Andrew's videos. He said that Andrew reminded him of people he cared about. This was the human side of the man who had just changed everything. He wanted everyone to believe he was just a person who had a bad day and a mechanical problem. However, the police were starting to find evidence that suggested something much darker. They found a white trash bag in his van that was filled with empty bottles. The human in the white van had secrets that were about to come out. The police soon learned exactly how much force hit Andrew's car. When a car is moving, it has a lot of energy. When that car stops suddenly by hitting something else, all that energy has to go somewhere. In this crash, the energy was so powerful it was like a small explosion. Experts who study accidents looked at the data from the van and the car. They found that at the moment of impact, there were 87 gs of force. To understand how strong 87 gs is, you have to think about how gravity feels. When you stand on the ground, you feel 1 g of force. If you were in a fast jet or a rocket, you might feel 5 or 6 gs, which makes it very hard to move or breathe. But 87 gs is much, much stronger. It is a level of force that the human body is not built to survive. It was like Andrew's body suddenly weighed 87 times more than normal for a split second. This massive force is what did so much damage to Andrew's brain. Even though he was wearing his seatbelt and his car had airbags, the force was just too much. His brain moved inside his head so fast that it caused deep and serious injuries. This wasn't just a simple bump in the road. It was what experts call an execution by physics. The van did not slow down at all before the hit. In fact, the data showed that the van was actually speeding up right before it slammed into Andrew. This meant that Andrew had no warning and no chance to get out of the way. While the driver of the van talked about his floor mat, the numbers told a different story. The 87 Gs of force proved that this was a violent and deadly event that should have never happened. As the police worked at the crash site, another story was happening just a few miles away. Evelyn Cross was at home, waiting for her husband to walk through the door. Andrew had texted her earlier to say he was almost done for the night. He was a man of habit, and he was usually never late. When 10:15 p.m. passed, and then 10:30 p.m., Evelyn began to feel a heavy weight in her chest. She opened an app on her phone to track Andrew's location. The little GPS dot showed he was at the corner of North and First. At first, she thought he was just stuck at a long red light. But as she watched, the dot did not move. It stayed perfectly still at that intersection for 5 minutes, then 10. She tried to call him, but the phone just rang and rang until it went to voicemail. Evelyn knew something was wrong. Andrew was only 4 minutes away from home, so close she could almost see the intersection from their neighborhood. She grabbed her keys and drove toward the spot on the map. As she got closer, she saw the bright, flashing lights of police cars and ambulances reflecting off the buildings. Her heart sank when she saw the yellow tape blocking the road. She didn't know yet that the mangle the witnesses talked about was Andrew's car. She didn't know that while she was looking at her phone, doctors were already fighting to save his life. The GPS dot told her where he was, but it couldn't tell her that a white van had changed their lives forever just a few minutes before she arrived. She stood behind the police line, staring at the wreckage, realizing that the man who was always on time would not be coming home tonight. To the world, Andrew Martin Cross was more than just a man in a car, he was the desert drifter. For years, he had built a legacy in layers, using his camera to tell stories about the old, forgotten parts of the American West. He was a history major who loved to explore, and his YouTube channel was a place where hundreds of thousands of people went to learn and go on adventures with him. He wasn't just showing a desert, he was showing the heart of the land. His videos were special because of his personality. He was known for his shenanigans, which were funny and lighthearted moments that made his viewers feel like they were right there with him. People loved him because he was real and kind. He had a way of making history feel alive, and his fans felt a deep connection to him, even if they had never met him in person. But Andrew's life had many layers beyond the screen. He was a husband who loved his wife, Evelyn, and a person who was deeply involved in his community. He was just 4 minutes away from finishing his latest journey when the crash happened. The man who spent his life exploring the past was suddenly robbed of his future. Now, all those layers of his life, the adventurer, the historian, the husband, and the friend, were at risk. As he lay in the hospital, his fans around the world began to hear the news and started to pray for the man they felt they knew so well. The desert drifter had faced many challenges in the wild, but this was a different kind of battle, and the stakes were higher than they had ever been. Inside the hospital, the quiet halls felt very different from the loud crash site. Andrew was now in the intensive care unit, or the ICU. This is a special part of the hospital for people who are hurt the most. Doctors and nurses worked quickly around him, but the news was not good. Andrew had severe brain trauma, which means his brain was badly injured from the 87 Gs of force. The doctors found that there was serious bleeding on the left side of his brain. This is a very dangerous place for an injury because that part of the brain controls many important things. Andrew was placed on a ventilator, a machine that helped him breathe because his body could not do it on its own. He was also kept under heavy sedation, which is like a very deep sleep, to help his brain rest and try to heal. Evelyn sat by his side, watching the monitors beep and flash. Each beep was a reminder that he was still fighting, but the doctors warned her that the situation was very bleak. They measured the pressure inside his head, and the numbers were much higher than they should be. This pressure made it even harder for his brain to recover from the damage. For days, the only sounds in the room were the humming of machines and the soft footsteps of the nurses. Andrew's fans and family were all waiting for any sign that he was getting better. But while he lay still in the hospital bed, the investigation into the driver was moving forward. The doctors were doing everything they could, but they knew that Andrew was facing a very difficult battle to wake up again. While Andrew lay still in the hospital, the police began to ask Anton Malvoni more questions about the crash. Anton had a very specific reason for why he couldn't stop his van. he told the officers about the rug theory. He claimed that the heavy rubber floor mat in his van had moved out of place. According to Anton, the mat got stuck on top of the gas pedal, pinning it down so the van would only go faster. Anton acted like he was a victim of a mechanical mistake. He told the police that he was only human and that he tried his best to fix the problem while he was driving. He described a scene of panic inside the van where he was fighting with the rug just to slow down. This was his first and main defense for the mangle at the intersection. However, the investigators were trained to look past what people say and look at the facts. They looked inside the van to see if the rug was actually stuck. They also knew that modern vans have safety systems to prevent this kind of thing from happening. If a driver hits the brakes hard, the engine is supposed to slow down, even if the gas pedal is pushed down. The more Anton talked about the rug, the more the police started to doubt him. They began to wonder if the rug was just a story he made up to hide the truth. While Andrew's family waited for good news at the hospital, the police were busy proving that the rug theory did not match the data from the crash. The floor mat wasn't the problem was the person behind the wheel. While the police were checking the van, they noticed a very bad smell coming from inside the vehicle. It was a sour, sharp smell that did not belong in a work van. As they looked around the driver's area, they found something that explained the odor. Tucked away was a plain white trash bag. When the officers opened the bag, they found it was filled with garbage that told a very different story than the one Anton was telling. Inside the bag, there were several small, empty bottles that used to hold alcohol. These are often called shooters. The police also found traces of other things that should not be near a driver, like smells that reminded them of strong chemicals. This discovery was a huge turning point in the investigation. Anton had been acting like a fan who had a mechanical accident, but the white trash bag suggested he had been making very dangerous choices before he ever got behind the wheel. The smell was so strong that it filled the air around the van. It was clear that this was not just a one-time mistake. The trash bag showed that the driver had been trying to hide his habits while he was on the road. While Anton talked about his floor mat getting stuck, the police were looking at the empty bottles and realizing that the van was essentially a rolling crime scene. The foul smells in the white trash bag became a key piece of evidence. It proved that the driver was not being honest about his condition on the night of the crash. This discovery made the police even more determined to find out the truth. They knew that the alcohol and chemicals they found in that bag were likely the real reason why Andrew's car was hit with so much force. The story of the stuck rug was falling apart, replaced by the dark reality found in a simple bag of trash. As the investigation moved into the late hours, the truth finally came out. This was what the police called the forensic midnight. The doctors and officers did not have to guess anymore because the blood tests were finished. The results were shocking. Anton Malvoni had a blood alcohol level of 0.201. To understand this number, you have to know that it is more than double the legal limit for driving. It meant that Anton's body was full of alcohol at the time of the crash. The tests also found traces of other dangerous things in his system, including chemicals like fentanyl and THC. The forensic midnight proved that Anton was not just a tired driver who had a bad floor mat. He was a person who was very impaired and should never have been on the road. While the city was dark and quiet, these numbers lit up the truth for the investigators. They now knew why the van was speeding and why there were no brake marks before the hit. The alcohol and chemicals had slowed down Anton's brain so much that he couldn't make good choices. The mangle at the intersection was not a mistake, it was the result of someone choosing to drive while they were dangerously intoxicated. For Andrew's family, these results were a painful blow. They were already dealing with the tragedy of the crash, and now they had to face the fact that it was entirely preventable. The data from the lab was cold and hard, and it destroyed every excuse Anton had given. The forensic midnight was the moment the accident officially turned into a criminal investigation. While the police were looking at the evidence, they found a very strange and disturbing twist in the case. Anton Malvoni admitted something that no one expected. He told the officers that he was not just a random driver who caused a crash. He said, "I actually was a fan." He told them that he watched Andrew's videos all the time and felt like he knew him. This is called a parasocial connection, or a fan feels a deep personal bond with a famous person they have never met. Anton even said that Andrew reminded him of people in his own family. It was a chilling thought for the investigators. The man who had just destroyed Andrew's car and caused his terrible injuries was someone who admired him. This made the crash feel even more personal and tragic. It wasn't just a stranger hitting another stranger, it was a fan hitting the person he looked up to on the screen. This revelation changed the way the police looked at Anton. They wondered how someone who claimed to be a fan could be so careless and dangerous on the road. Anton even told his mother from jail that when he got out, he wanted to start his own YouTube channel. He thought the first video he should make would be about this very crash. The parasocial twist added a layer of darkness to the story. It showed that even though Anton felt a connection to Andrew, it didn't stop him from making the choices that led to the mangle at the intersection. While Andrew's true friends and family were grieving, his fan was already planning how to become famous from the tragedy he had caused. The police soon found out that this was not the first time people were worried about Anton Malvoni's driving. They discovered a document called the Ready Report. This was an official warning from a workplace or a group that had seen Anton driving earlier that same day. The report said that Anton was acting strange and that he should not be behind the wheel of a vehicle. This was a warning ignored. Even though someone had noticed that Anton was not in a good state to drive, he still got into the white van and headed toward the intersection of North and First. The report showed that the crash was not a sudden surprise that no one could have predicted. Instead, there were clear signs that something bad was going to happen. For the investigators, the Ready Report was a very important piece of the puzzle. It proved that Anton had the chance to stop before anyone got hurt. If he had listened to the warning or if someone had stopped him, Andrew might have made it home that night. Knowing that there was a warning made the tragedy feel even heavier for Andrew's family. It meant that the mangle at the red light was a choice made by a man who knew he wasn't supposed to be driving. The Ready Report took away the idea that this was just a random accident and showed that it was a failure to act on a serious warning. As the investigation continued, the police realized they were dealing with two different versions of Anton Malvoni. This was the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde of the case. During his interview, Anton sometimes acted like a polite, sad man who felt terrible about the crash. This was his Jekyll side. But then, his Hyde side would appear, a man who was confused, angry, and seemed to be living in a different reality. Anton began to talk about having a psychosis episode. He told the police that his mind had simply snapped. He claimed that he didn't know where he was or what he was doing when he hit the gas pedal. He blamed his brain and his mental health for the 82-mile-per-hour impact. He wanted the officers to believe that he wasn't a criminal, but someone who was having a medical emergency that he couldn't control. The psychosis interview was a way for Anton to try to escape the blame for his choices. He talked about the beast and strange thoughts he had while driving. However, the police had to figure out if this was a real mental health crisis or if it was just a side effect of the .201 alcohol level and the drugs in his system. They knew that many people try to use psychosis as an excuse when they have done something they regret. Agent Rook listened closely to every word. He looked for clues that would show if Anton was telling the truth or just acting. While Andrew remained in a deep sleep in the ICU, his life hanging by a thread, the man who hit him was busy trying to convince the world that his mind was broken. The battle for the truth was becoming a fight between medical facts and a driver's tall tales. While Anton talked about his mind being broken, the police looked at the van's computer. Every modern vehicle has a black box that records what the car does in the seconds before a crash. The data from this box told the cold, hard truth. It showed that in the final tenth of a second before hitting Andrew's car, Anton did not hit the brakes. Instead, he pushed the gas pedal down as hard as he could. This was intentional acceleration. The data proved that the van was going 82 miles per hour and was actually speeding up at the moment of the crash. There was no sign that Anton tried to avoid the car in front of him. There were no tire marks on the road to show he tried to stop. The stuck rug story did not match the computer records at all. If the rug had pinned the pedal, the speed would have been steady, but the data showed a foot pressing down for more power. This discovery was the most important moment of the investigation. It turned the case from a mistake into a crime of intent. It showed that even if Anton was confused or intoxicated, his body made the choice to go faster. This tenth of a second changed everything for the court case. It meant that Anton wasn't just a passenger in a runaway van, he was the one making it a weapon. Agent Rook realized that this data was the smoking gun. It showed that while Andrew was sitting peacefully at a red light, the person behind him was accelerating into his lane. The physics did not lie, and the computer did not have a psychosis. It only recorded the actions of a driver who chose not to stop. The dream of a mechanical accident was dead, replaced by the reality of a deliberate and deadly act. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere in the ICU grew even heavier. For weeks, the doctors and nurses had worked tirelessly to keep Andrew stable, but the damage to his brain was too severe. This was the stage where the ICU declines, and the hopeful signs began to fade away. The medical team performed daily tests to see if Andrew could respond to simple commands, like squeezing a hand or blinking an eye. Slowly, the responses became less noticeable. The flicker of movement in his fingers stopped. The way his eyes would sometimes move behind his lids ceased. Each day, the doctors had to give Evelyn harder news. The swelling in Andrew's brain had not gone down as they had hoped, and the machines were now doing almost all the work to keep his heart beating and his lungs moving. Evelyn stayed by his side, holding his hand even when it felt cold and still. She talked to him about their home, their friends, and the many adventures they had shared as the Desert Drifter team. But the silence from Andrew was deafening. The vibrant, energetic man who loved to explore the vast deserts was locked inside a body that could no longer communicate with the outside world. The final tenth of a second at the intersection had caused a lifetime of damage. While the legal team was building a case against Anton Malvoni, the medical reality was that Andrew was drifting further away. The monitors still beeped, but they were no longer a sign of a fight, they were a sign of a life being held in place by wires and tubes. The world was beginning to realize that the beloved YouTuber might never tell another story. While Andrew was fighting for his life, Anton Malvoni was sitting in a jail cell. But he was not just sitting in silence. He began to talk to his cellmates and even called his family on the recorded jail phones. These were his jailhouse confessions. In these talks, his stories became even stranger. He moved away from the stuck rug excuse and started talking about a near-death experience he once had. Anton told a story about seeing his grandmother in a dream or a vision. He claimed she told him that he had a debt to pay. He talked about the beast inside him and used many stories from the Bible to explain why the crash happened. He seemed to think that what happened at the intersection was part of a bigger plan. To the people listening, it sounded like he was trying to make sense of his actions by turning them into a movie or a spiritual battle. What was most upsetting was how he talked about his future. Even though he had caused a mangle that was killing a beloved creator, Anton was already planning his own fame. He told his mother that when he got out, he wanted to be a YouTuber too. He thought his story of the crash and his time in jail would make him popular. He didn't seem to realize that his fan connection to Andrew made these plans feel very disrespectful. These confessions showed the hide side of Anton more clearly than ever. He wasn't focused on the person he hurt, he was focused on how he could use the tragedy to tell his own story. For Agent Rook, these recordings were more proof that Anton was a manipulator who was always looking for a way to avoid the simple truth. He had chosen to drink, drive, and accelerate into a red light. The jailhouse confessions proved that the driver was living in a world of his own making, far away from the reality of the hospital room where Andrew lay still. The time had finally come for the most difficult choice a person can ever make. For weeks, the doctors had watched Andrew closely, but his brain was no longer showing any signs of life. The machines were doing everything for him, but the man known as the Desert Drifter was already gone. This was the decision. Evelyn and the rest of Andrew's family gathered in the quiet ICU room to say their final goodbyes. They decided to follow Andrew's wishes. He was a man who loved freedom and the open air, and he would not have wanted to be kept alive by wires and tubes if there was no hope of waking up. With heavy hearts and tears in their eyes, the family gave the doctors permission to stop the machines. They chose to let him go peacefully, surrounded by the people who loved him most. As the ventilators were turned off, the room became very still. There were no more beeps or humming sounds from the equipment. It was a moment of deep sadness, but also a moment of respect for the man Andrew was. He had spent his life telling stories of the past, and now his own story had reached its final chapter. He slipped away quietly, leaving behind a world that was much darker without his bright spirit and his shenanigans. Outside the hospital, the sun began to set over the desert he loved so much. The news of his passing spread quickly to his fans across the globe. Millions of people who had never met him felt like they had lost a close friend. The decision to remove the machines was the end of the medical battle, but it was just the beginning of the long journey to find justice in a courtroom. Andrew Martin Cross was finally at peace, but the world was not yet done with the man who took him away. With Andrew's passing, the case against Anton Malvoni transformed from a traffic accident into a homicide investigation. The courtroom became a stage where two very different stories were told. On one side was the prosecution, armed with the forensic midnight data and the final tenth of acceleration. On the other side was Anton's defense, which leaned heavily on the idea of a psychotic break. The defense argued that Anton was not in control of his mind. They brought in experts to talk about mental health and the beast Anton claimed to see. They wanted the jury to believe that the alcohol and drugs were just a way he was trying to self-medicate for a brain that was already broken. They portrayed him as a victim of his own biology, a man who was only human and lost in a nightmare. The prosecution's hammer. However, the prosecution had a different tool, the black box. They didn't focus on what Anton thought, they focused on what Anton did. Speed, 82 miles per hour in a residential zone. Brakes, 0% usage. Throttle, 100% floor-down acceleration at impact. Impairment, a blood alcohol level of 0.201, enough to make any person a weapon on the road. This wasn't a mind failing, the prosecutor argued. This was a driver choosing to ignore the ready report, choosing to ignore the red light, and choosing to hit the gas. As the trial went on, the parasocial twist came back into play. The jury heard the jailhouse tapes where Anton talked about his future fame and his grandmother's debt. It became clear to those in the room that while Anton may have had struggles, he also had a total lack of remorse for the man he had killed, the man he claimed to be a fan of. The verdict. The jury did not take long to decide. The evidence of the intentional acceleration was too strong to ignore. Anton Malvoni was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, looking at Anton's history and the warning ignored from earlier that day, sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison. The human who caused the mangle would now spend his life behind bars, far away from the YouTube fame he had dreamed of in his cell.